Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Dees. Well, guys, it is literally the last day of July as I'm recording this, which means for the vast majority of folks out there, it's move out day. So how's it going? Has anyone cried yet? Has anyone quit yet? What kind of stuff did your residents leave behind for you to deal with? How is your team meshing together? How are your vendors doing? Look, we want to hear all about it, and we're giving away prizes to you and your team members on a daily basis for telling us about it. So if you have not downloaded our mobile app, go do it now. It's called SHI Connect, and you can find it both at the App Store as well as on Google Play. Once you make an account, start posting your stories from turn. You know, the funny team pictures, the gross stuff your residents left behind, as well as all those happy faces on move-in day. The app is a place to share our industry wins and losses. It's a place to vent as well as celebrate. And more than anything, it's just really a place to network with other student housing professionals and to help each other out when we need it. So go download the app today. Again, it is SHI Connect. Okay, so let's talk about today's episode. It's not going to be about turn. If anything, it's about something you should consider doing if you end up with some vacancy after turn and after move-ins are over with. If you've been listening to this podcast over the 18 months or so, you've heard our opening advertisement for Vector Travel. And for those that don't know about Vector, quite simply, they take our vacant units that you were not able to lease out, and they turn them into short-term rentals on Airbnb and other similar platforms. I don't think they do VRBO, but those type of places. If you've ever found yourself with a vacant unit or 5 or 10, you know how hard that can be to lease up until the spring semester or even next fall. That's just the nature of student housing. And a lot of us who have found ourselves in that situation thought about and maybe even tried converting those units into short-term rentals for game day weekends or parents that come to visit. If you've ever followed through with that and tried it, you've probably learned like I did. It's way more work than you originally thought, and it created a complete distraction from your main job. And that's why I love Vector. I've used them myself, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the interview. But they take all of that hassle away, and they maximize the revenue that can be generated. So I know many of you are facing some vacancy this coming fall, and I wanted to sit down with Vector CEO Mickey Kropf to give you a behind the biz look at what they do and how they do it. So before I hit play on this interview, I want to mention something. After this interview, Mickey sent me a comp report of current and projected nightly rates in many of the college markets, and I was shocked at what some of these markets are getting for nightly rates. I know most of the Tier 1 schools, of course, in the Power 5 conferences, have done very well from a pre-leasing standpoint this year. Those same markets are also getting some extremely high nightly rates on the short-term rental market. Places like Oxford, Mississippi, and Athens, Georgia, they're getting over $450, sometimes $500 a night for a 2-bedroom apartment. And that's just been in the past few weeks. It's not even looking quite far enough into the football season when, that may even double. But at those rates, you've only got to rent it out for 2 or 3 nights to make the same that you would in monthly rent. So if you're sitting on some vacant units for this fall, please listen to this interview with Mickey, and at the very least, send him an email and ask him for some projections for your property. All right, let's get to the interview. Mickey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Wes. Glad to be here.
Well, it's first of all, I want to thank you for being such of a generous sponsor for the past was only supposed to be a year, but it's ended up being like a year and a half.
Well, because it's been so good, so fun, so productive. Love working with you, Wes. So thank you.
Well, it's yeah, and it was one of those things we got caught behind when I was out for COVID last summer, and you were gracious enough to to allow me to catch up on that. So I appreciate that. It's great when we've got a sponsor like that for an entire year, because one, I don't have to do, a lot of different ad spots for it. So it's a little less work for me, but it's also, everybody seems to start kind of understanding, who Vector is, because, they're hearing it over and over again. And so that's been neat to, watch, that happen over the past 18 months or so. And it seems like, anybody I talk to, any conference that I go to, there's somebody that says, "Hey, tell me a little bit about this short-term rental sponsor that you've got." And so that's been fantastic.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, we would say the same thing, that just sort of like category awareness has just really increased. And I think a lot of it has to do with this partnership. So thank you.
Well, when I do these Behind the Biz podcast episodes, I really like to just, right off the bat, ask the CEO or whoever it is that I'm interviewing, okay, what's the 30 to 90 second elevator speech? We all put them together for our businesses. So for our audience who may not have heard that before, what's your 30 to 90 second elevator speech?
Yeah. So we are a multifamily hospitality company. We specialize in student housing, amongst other asset classes. And essentially, we generate additional NOI for our clients, management companies, and ownership through hospitality operations. So we're a full service operator, and we can turn vacancy into net new NOI, I think is kind of the core value proposition that we provide.
And basically doing that is through kind of the short-term rental not agencies, but short-term rental channels that are out there. Airbnb, vectorstays.com, which is your website. I know you've got, that serves as a channel as well. But that's where you're pulling your audience, or I shouldn't say your audience, but that's where you're pulling your customers in from, is from those short-term rental channels, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so, the whole framework, the reason that we can even exist is that the operation, the tech stack, the personnel, it's all different with a kind of shorter term stay focus. And so what we figured out is that we can go in alongside on-site management and activate spaces. Maybe it's 3 or 4 units, and it's just kind of the limited service model. We get the on-site team a little more involved, or maybe it's a full service operation, 10 or more units. Maybe it's a brand new property. Maybe it's something that delivered late, or maybe it just has a big vacancy issue for some reason. But we can go in and activate those spaces. So add maybe housewares, linens, decor to finish off the furnishing, so that somebody can just kind of show up with a suitcase and stay from anywhere from 1 or 2 nights, 3 nights, to 60, 90 nights, but they have everything they need in place. And it's a full service operation. So we're handling, marketing, booking, guest services, housekeeping, all of the accounting and compliance. The only thing we really don't do is maintenance typically, though we can do that too. Yeah. And then, for our clients, whether again, management companies or ownership, they're just going to get basically what pretty much amounts to NOI. I mean, there may be 1 or 2 additional expenses to net out, but we'll take our fee, we'll cover all of our expenses, and and then pay that out. And so it can really be a boon for a property that may otherwise have a little bit of a challenge on their hands.
Well, I can speak to that firsthand. I kind of feel like this is the hair club for men, because not only am I advertising for you guys, but I've also been a client as well. And I had a property in Fayetteville, Arkansas, that I was doing asset management for a client, and the property was a small property. There was no reason that property should not have been garnering more leases. But here's the thing about being in kind of a tier 1 school like University of Arkansas and being a small property. I think everybody has worked on a small property, and this is less than 300 beds that I'm talking about. You're in a great market, but you don't have the marketing dollars to play with the big boys. the 800 bed, the 1,000 bed properties, even the 500 bed properties. It's just not there. And so you're really having to make a lot of personal relationships and that type of thing in order to fill that property up. And we were just having a problem with that back in 2018 and 2019, and came across you in 2018 and said, you know what, I think this makes a lot of sense. We'd had some conversations, and when we got closer and closer, to really this time of the year, July, August, we said, look, we know we're going to end up with some vacancy. Let's do everything that we can to consolidate so that we've got as many completely vacant apartments are possible. I think we ended up with somewhere between 4 and 6.
Yeah, I think it was 6, at least to start. Yep.
Yeah, and we handed those over to you. It didn't get started, just not due to you, just because of insurance and stuff like that. It took a little bit longer. We didn't get you in there for the full football season and that type of thing, which was a bummer. And so that's one reason I wanted to record this now, so that if there are folks listening to this and they know they're going to be looking at some vacancy and possibly have some completely full units available, this is the time to start talking about it and to engage with Mickey, because it does take, a few weeks to, be able to execute on everything and get management companies to sign off of it, ownership to sign off of it, and all that kind of stuff. But when you guys came in, like right away, we saw a difference. There were immediate bookings. I was just kind of shocked at where all it was coming from. And,
right. And there was a brand new market for us too, right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I think is another thing that sometimes potential clients think is a roadblock or whatever. And they say, well, you guys haven't operated in fill in the blank, this tiny, maybe it's a tiny tier 3 market, or maybe it is a tier 1 market, but we haven't done it there. We have a repeatable system. We can go in there and activate those spaces in 2 to 3 weeks, and they're generating cash flow that quickly. And it's not sort of like, well, will this succeed or not? It will succeed. It's just a matter of, what is that level of success? Is it going to be rent premiums that we wind up returning? Because we certainly do that at times. Or is it, just going to replace rent? Will it just defray some of those other expenses that go with it and just generate some other income for the property? Usually it's at least a rent replacement though.
Yeah. I was really shocked so you guys came in fall of 2019 on those units, and as we got into March of 2020 and everything hit with the pandemic, and I was like, well, that's I'm probably not going to lease any of those out or rent any of those out on short term. And it did like really cool off for about 3 or 4 weeks, but then all of a sudden it just exploded. And
yeah. Well, that was a crazy thing. Not just there, it was overall. We talked about category awareness. Amongst the broader consumer base during the pandemic, the counterintuitive thing that happened was, people weren't traveling the same way, of course. But if they weren't truly on lockdown, maybe they wanted to go somewhere else and work remotely, and they had the ability to do that now. Or maybe they just wanted to just get out of town a little bit, go explore. I mean, my family did that. We took a road trip because we couldn't do like a normal family vacation, and wound up going to some smaller markets. But anyway, the net result was category awareness for general consumers around what we call, industry speak, like alternative accommodations. So, anything that's not a traditional hotel, but is in hospitality, that category awareness went, I think it doubled during this span of 2020 to now, which is amazing. And it just means that this thing is really, it's going more mainstream, not just within, the student housing space, but amongst broader consumers.
Yeah. Well, so that's been my experience. And, even, moving into the summer of 2020, there were certainly during those months, we were getting more in our revenue share than what we would have from market rent, had we been able to rent it out, the previous fall. So that was fantastic. And that, made me a true believer in what you guys are doing. One of the main reasons I chose you guys Am I able to talk about Austin, Texas, or?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we have a property in common, which a lot of folks that are listening will recognize the name of this property, which is the Dobie Center in Austin, Texas. Dobie Center is actually where, my understanding, Michael Dell started Dell Computers out of that building. And so this historical building, it did get sold this past year to Trinity Partners, ended up selling it to the University of Texas. And now it's being operated as within their on campus res life. That's how important this particular property is to the UT Austin campus. And it was something that, it's built like a traditional dorm in a lot of ways. It's got its own food service. There's also a multi-use facet to it as well, because you've got kind of a mall and food court at the very bottom level. I think even at one time there was a movie theater in it. But, when I found out, because I managed the company I worked with, managed that property for a couple of years, and prior to Trinity purchasing it. And South by Southwest, we had, we had a whole floor that was pretty much unrented. And we said, we could really make up this income during South by Southwest. And we worked with somebody, the manager knew somebody local that operated a lot of Airbnbs, and she came in and kind of helped him out with how to organize that. And that was only 2 weeks, and everybody on site was just dragging after that was done with. And it was one of those things where we all had to look at each other and say, okay, was that juice really worth the squeeze? Because I don't think it was. And so when you and I started talking back in 2018, come to find out, we were actually doing short-term rentals for Trinity at the Dobie Center at that point in time. I'm like, and they just had great things to say about you. I'm like, okay, if Mickey has figured it out on the Dobie Center, then I know he can figure it out on any other kind of student housing. So,
yeah, thank you for that background. And I think that's right. And that was actually our first student housing asset that we got into. And prior to that, we were in other multifamily properties that were, I think frankly more what your average person would think they would be, like Class A, new, some kind of design element to kind of fit that if you're an Airbnb consumer, you're kind of familiar with that Airbnb design aesthetic. And then here we were taking, yes, it had been renovated, but mostly not in the units, mostly in the the common spaces and amenities, and we layered on housewares, linens, decor. I actually just looked back at the photos and the data the other day. It looked pretty darn good, and it performed really well. And so that was also the first property that we did with Trinity, and they're mostly conventional market rate, but they have a student housing presence too, and and that launched a relationship that we still have. Thankfully, we still work with them, and that's expanded into probably 20 plus, maybe 25 assets together over time. They come and go, they sell, but yeah, it was challenging in some ways. It had kind of central controls on HVAC, and the units didn't have full kitchens and all that. But I think we sent them about 300 to 350K in payouts over the course of a year, right? So it was a success. It was 15 to 18 units that were just sitting vacant, and they would have otherwise. And that really, I think that the gentleman there, Dave Seiler, who gave us that opportunity. I really think of him as a visionary in the multifamily space, but he saw that, he took that, kind of internal case study and leveraged it into a whole program that they've built out with us. But yeah, as we said, that just got us going. We've since, parlayed that into working with some other kind of household names in the student housing space.
Yeah. So that was kind of the intersection with student housing, but let's go back, a little bit before that, because what I like about Behind the Biz episode that we do is we like finding out about the origin story of these companies. So, Yeah, give us the origin story of Vector. How did that come along? Was that something you went to school for? From a
No,
hospitality standpoint?
no, definitely
Well,
not.
you didn't,
Yeah,
but it is a cool story. So
yeah.
yeah,
So, I mean, I guess my story, I'll just start with, I was a baseball player. That took me to lots of cool places. I got to go to an Ivy League school as a result. Kept my nose clean, had good grades and all, but you need something usually to get into one of those. And baseball was the thing for me. Played a little bit of minor league baseball, but when that was all done, my whole life had just been baseball and, books. And that was about it. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I wound up in commercial real estate on the development side, mostly because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it afforded me lots of opportunities to try out different functions, so asset management was basically my first role. I knew nothing, right? And they just threw me into a role. I worked with a company called Clark out of DC on the development team on a project actually at Fort Benning, and then rotated through various things. Worked in that same field generally, development and commercial real estate finance for 8 years, and then. Not this business. I started another business in the short-term rental space called rented.com. And it was a wholesale marketplace for short-term rental management companies like Vector is now to acquire units to manage. So definitely a niche product, whatever, but what, kind of started my entrepreneurial journey doing that. Well, through that experience, we built some of those initial relationships. In fact, Trinity was one of them, but various other multifamily companies that were open at least to leasing units to short-term rental companies. Not our model, which I really think is. The leasing had to come first. It had to open the door for just the short-term rental use in the properties, fitting into what real estate companies were accustomed to. Yeah. When I think I did that about 6 years, got it to a good place, built out the team, had repeatable systems, but I got really excited about this opportunity with Vector to at least try to build a client-driven revenue share multifamily hospitality company. Like I mentioned, there were other companies out there doing it. Rented had been facilitating those leases, but I just didn't think that model was sustainable. And sure enough, when the pandemic hit, some of the companies that had raised, hundreds of millions of dollars doing that went under. And, and Vector, even though it had just launched in 2018, still very much an early stage business, had a more resilient model and was able to not only survive that, but we actually grew by, I think it was 300+% in 2020. And so that's sort of proven that. Competitors that still remain, are now doing this model too, a little bit more rev share. But yeah, and then as we've explored the market, we've understood that actually student housing is a great place for us to be for various reasons, which we could go into.
Yeah, I think let's start with this because I like asking everybody this when it comes to student housing and what you're doing in your business. What surprised you the most?
Yeah, so in a conventional property, there really is, admittedly, there's a tension there with the short-term rental use. Oftentimes, there's sort of this perception of less security and strangers who aren't part of the community and so forth. And I know we hear those reservations from student housing leadership on a regular basis too. Sure. But all I can fall back on is our experience, going back to Dobie in 2018 and then, probably dozens of other properties since then in student housing. The resident population has generally no issue, right? They're consumers of short-term rentals themselves. They use Uber and Uber Eats and, they travel on Airbnb. It is generally, these sort of platforms that we're talking about, some of them are like Homes and Villas by Marriott and a little more traditional Hopper. We distribute on there. That's Capital One members. But the bread and butter of Airbnb is kind of the under 40, under 45 crowd. And so anyway, the point is, it's just natural to them. They just think, yeah, that makes sense. They had vacant units. Cool. Yeah, they turned them into short-term rentals. And then when we give them something out of it, we say, hey, these are your guest suites, if you will. Yeah. Here's a coupon code. Your friends and family can come and stay. Now it's almost an amenity to them. And so setting that narrative we found really is helpful. Yeah. And then, just the real potential that I think, we still have conversations with student housing companies that don't have any kind of activity yet with short-term rentals, short-term stays. And they just can't believe that the consumer side will want to stay in their property. But as we all know, anybody listening to this in West, of course, some of these student housing assets, they're not Dobie-like, right? They're Class A multifamily buildings that, other than the business focus, other than maybe the floor plan setup, they could be just high rent, conventional multifamily. And I know, some buildings are being repositioned that way. But the point is, to the consumer, they can still be great experiences. And just by nature, student housing assets are co-located with a demand generator in a college or university setting. That's going to bring vendors to town. It's going to bring alumni to town. It brings, adjunct professors to town. It just brings, leisure travelers who maybe just want a weekend to go try some college restaurants. So anyway, it's, I think on both fronts, on the supply front, or all three fronts really, on the resident response front and then the consumer front, they've all been surprising to us, but pleasantly so.
Yeah. Well, you think about all of these, tier 1 schools that are in the Southeast and part of, the Power 5 conferences, they're big universities, but Clemson's a prime example. I'm pretty sure there's still no more than 5 hotels in Clemson, and you've got to drive out to Greenville or down to Augusta before you find a decent hotel. And
it's a great point.
You're talking about a community that on a football weekend can surge to over 100,000 people.
That's right.
And it's one of those things where they're just not being served well from a hospitality standpoint. That I think that's one of the reasons you guys have probably seen so much success in that. Plus, you've got, if it's not a land grant university where you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, it's like your Raleigh, your Tallahassee, where you're in a state capital, and there's Austin's a great example. There's great festivals that go on, and hotels can certainly be expensive, and not everybody wants to share a bathroom with whoever they're going to that festival with or a conference with. Student housing provides something very convenient where everybody's got their own bedroom and bathroom. So I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing so much success with it, which has been great to see.
Yeah, and you hit on I think the main value proposition to the consumers is really just value compared to hotels. So yeah, and you're spot on. Many college towns, if you will, are they're sort of under hoteled, and there really is a need for this type of lodging. But then when you think about even a family, like I have 3 young kids, when we travel, we really do prefer at least the option of having a kitchen in our unit, as opposed to, a traditional hotel wouldn't. It would have a kitchenette at best. So sometimes that might mean a Marriott Residence Inn, but think of these vacant student housing units almost like extended stay opportunities, and maybe we don't use it most of the time. Maybe we eat out 2 meals out of the day, but maybe we do breakfast because it's easy with the, the full kitchen setup. Many of our consumers love that. They also just love the additional space, so you get, basically every unit's a suite, right? When compared against a hotel, you have a common area, then you have bedrooms. Think about colleagues traveling on a business trip. You could have 2 unrelated adults, even opposite gender, whatever, and they can stay in the same unit because they can go in their room and lock the door, and they have their own ensuite bath typically. So anyway, we've really surprisingly found it to be a great fit.
So let's talk really quick about, kind of how turnkey everything is, because I'm sure when, back in 2016, 2015, whenever it was that we tried at the Dobie Center doing those short-term rentals on Airbnb, I'm sure we probably didn't report it right on the taxes. We probably were supposed to get some type of specific business license or whatever. You guys really take care of all of that and make sure that the business doesn't have any extra work that they're going to have to do. Can you kind of explain, from the start until when you pull off of a property, what is it that that company, that property manager, can expect that process to be like?
Yeah. So that was something we identified really early on, was that at least most, we shouldn't say all, but most companies, and then their, leadership, and then on down the ranks to the on-site teams, they're not short-term rental experts, and they really don't want to be. And so we did design it to be as turnkey as possible from as you said, the compliance side, just making sure, is it allowed? Is this an allowed use for this asset in this market? And then registering, if so. There's typically, most markets now have some kind of path of registering units and complying, collecting occupancy taxes, paying those. We'll handle all of that on the front end. Then there's the setup. So typically student housing units, of course, are furnished, but there is some additional, it's really OS&E. It's really not FF&E typically, but coffee makers, all of the consumables and toiletries that would go in a unit, linens, and then just some decor, just to kind of brighten up a space, make it interesting, maybe tell a story with that space. Like we did some in Louisville recently in a student housing asset. We had some Hunter S. Thompson and some Muhammad Ali, decor wound up in there, just to kind of bring in that local flavor. But point is, we do handle all of that on the front end. We even finance those setup expenses. We typically don't want to own the furnishings or the OS&E, but we also realize when we're brought in, there's usually some kind of a need. And so maybe they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but they just don't have a budget set aside. Or maybe they're a small business or a small ownership group and they're struggling a little bit. Well, we can help activate that space and start generating that income for them, and then just let the operation kind of pay us back on some of those supplies. But yeah, and then in terms of guest services, housekeeping, really the whole operation. And again, typically not maintenance, just because there's usually a maintenance team on site that and that gives the on-site team a little bit of control that sometimes they want. They can at least go in and check things, audit things. But again, we can do the maintenance too. And so yeah, and then all of the accounting, which is a little more complex than just cashing a normal check. You got on even one unit, you may have 6-7 transactions in a month. You'll have some resolutions. You've got other kinds of fees and things. We handle all of that, and then we pay out in arrears on a monthly basis. We paid our clients on time throughout the pandemic, which is something that those that focused on leasing really can't say. I'm not sure there's any business out there that does what we do that has that kind of a track record.
Yeah. Well, before we move on, I know there are some competitors out there, like you mentioned. There were several in 2020 that got out or couldn't make it. I think that one of the happiest days I've ever seen you is when you called me and told me that Expedia was pulling out. You were looking to take on as many of their clients as possible. So, but there are some competitors out there that are doing this for apartment communities, and I don't know anybody that is specifically focusing on student housing. But tell us a little bit what sets you apart from other competitors.
Yeah. So since inception, which was in early 2018, it was really all about the client need and really turning that whole multifamily hospitality leasing model on its head. And so, it meant in practice sitting on the same side of the table most of the time as your client, as opposed to, a lessor-lessee sort of relationship, which at times can be somewhat adversarial. And even in the documents, they're sort of set up that way. Well, everything about this was around client needs and delivering value for them, super majority of the income going to them, but also, setting up, having this operation, it's tech enabled. It's partially remote management, partially on the ground management, but allowing some customization for each client to kind of set their program. And we've gotten to the point now, a few years into working with student housing companies where we're signing portfolio level kind of arrangements. I think of it just as an option, kind of a tool on their shelf. When they need it, they can pull it off and use it. And as you said, now is kind of the time when some of those existing relationships are tapping us, maybe in some net new markets. But that client focus on stay length, on their pricing concerns, on how do we screen guests and all of that, because we do screen guests. We want to make sure that there aren't issues too, but we allow them to have that input. And I really think that just pervades our culture. And thankfully, we get good feedback on that on a regular basis. That whether it's me or somebody on the ops team or whatever, they can reach out to us basically any time of day, at least somebody, and we'll get right back to them. And we take their concerns or their input, very seriously, and their ideas, for positive things. It's always been a shared success model. The revenue share thing has always been what we've done. And so, I think that does set us apart a little bit because of that culture that we've built around that. we've really always, pretty much always done student housing too. So I think we understand student housing operators and student housing owners pretty well at this point. And I consider us student housing specialists for short-term rentals. And then, the last thing would just be on kind of the technology, but still, again, tying it back to the clients. We built a proprietary analytics software that really does help us with channel and revenue management. At the end of the day, when we're hired, it's because they need to make money. They want to make money through this use. And so this proprietary tool kind of helps us, informs us on, what are the best channels, informs our revenue strategy and some of our tactics around that stuff. And then it also includes a client portal component. So really at any given time, they can log in, they can see what's going on with a given asset or the overall portfolio, who's in each unit, what's the expected financial outcome this month, what's it been in the past, and so forth. So, back to it being a partnership, there has to be transparency and there has to be trust, and we've kind of built everything around that.
Yeah, that tech is great, and then also the tech that you guys deploy to make sure that you don't have any problems with residents is great as well. We don't have time to get into it today, but there's I think it's called Noise Aware.
That's right.
Which is a product that you guys deploy into the units that you guys activate, and it doesn't monitor conversations, but it monitors noise level. And if that gets to a point that it's obvious that probably someone outside of the apartment can hear them, it alerts you guys, and you guys call the resident or the temporary resident or whatever you call them directly, and start looking into, hey, is something going on here? So
that's right.
So that's fantastic. I love what you guys are doing from that standpoint. Well, hey, again, the company is Vector Travel. The website is vectorstays.com. I will tell everybody, make sure that you go to a special landing page that Mickey has set up for our listeners, which is vectorstays.com/SHI. So if you go there and you put your information in, you'll get an additional discount if you end up working with Mickey. And then also, I think something that's really great about working with you, Mickey, is there are some student housing assets that just aren't a good match, and you can pretty much identify those after an initial conversation. So I think you guys have been in this long enough. You kind of know what will work and what will not work. So that's fantastic.
It's true.
Well, any other parting thoughts?
Hey, I know turn's coming up. So I wish best of luck to everybody that is listening. And, I know that'll be difficult, but yeah, just keep us in mind and really not even just us, just keep the use in mind. I mean, if you wind up with 1 or 2 units, you might want to try it out yourself. Yeah. There's additional tools out there, but it can be a good way to monetize your vacant units. And who knows, maybe somebody has a hospitality bent or a hospitality arm in their organization. Maybe it's something that they want to actually explore doing themselves. But otherwise, for all the reasons we mentioned, sometimes it makes sense just to partner with somebody, and you can tackle it across one or more assets with a partner.
Well, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time today, and yeah, we'll probably talk to you sometime after turn, I'm sure.
Sounds good. All right, thanks, Wes.
All right, take care.